All right, so let's talk about those financial statements. So again, they're required that every public company furnish them. Okay, and the SEC gets a copy as well, and they make it available on their website for any interested party to view. All right, and the 4 statements that I'm going to give you, just because I know they differ just a tiny bit in Chapter 2, I'm going to give you the corporate statements. Okay, in Chapter 2, they talk about statements for a sole proprietorship. Great, it's an optional topic for us. We are just required to cover the corporate statements, so that's what I'm going to focus on here. They're more similar than not, don't worry, but you're introduced to it in Chapter 3. But I'm just going to show you the corporate ones starting in Chapter 2, so we don't have to then switch in Chapter 3. Don't worry, it's for your benefit. All right, the first one is the income statement. The income statement is also called the profit and loss statement or the statement of earnings. I know at my husband's job, they just call it the P&L, right? Also called the P&L, profit and loss. And I know at least for him, for their company, that is a very important statement. They're always looking to see, are we in the black? You might hear that expression, meaning do we have net income or are we in the red? Meaning we have a net loss. So maybe you've heard those phrases before. If you're in the black, that's a good thing, you have net income. If you're in the red, that's a bad thing, you have a net loss. And don't worry, we'll talk about how to calculate each one of these statements. I'm just letting you know what they are right now. The next one is, and again, I'm doing the corporate statement of retained earnings. Retained earnings. I know in Chapter 2, it calls it the statement of owner's equity, and that's because they're looking at a sole proprietorship. I'm going to skip right to the corporate statement, which you'll see in Chapter 3, which is statement of retained earnings. And that's really the only one that's different. The other 3 are the same, whether it's a sole proprietorship or a corporation. Next is, and this is just a tiny little statement. You'll see when we get there, it's a little baby statement. It's so tiny. Number 3, the balance sheet. This is also sometimes called the statement of financial position. And then lastly, we have the statement of cash flows. Statement of cash flows. Okay. In the next video, we'll go into them in a little more detail. But there you have the 4 financial statements: income statement, statement of retained earnings, balance sheet, and statement of cash flows. So these are the required statements to be prepared. The other thing that's required is what's called notes to the financial statements. Right, so those first 4 financial statements are going to show you all the numerical figures. But in case you need to explain any of those figures, that's where you're going to make the explanation, is in the notes. You're just going to kind of describe what's seen on those 4 statements, or maybe go into more detail about them. And really, that's more of the topic for an intermediate class. I just want you to know it's one of the required components to be made available. Okay, so all of these must be made available to the public. Made available to the public on a periodic basis, at least every year. All right, I'll see you in the next recording.